I had been completely off guard. And this is the result. Benimaru. I'm fine. No, you are totally not fine. Tisk, as I thought, it is impossible. Without magic usable in this situation, I have no means to save this one. Luminous stated cruelly. Benimaru's heat is dropping rapidly. Even though time is supposed to be stopped, the outflow of energy isn't stopping. Don't make such a face. Protecting Rimuru-sama is my. Valdenava's attack was a strike that corrodes and destroys the soul. Benimaru's soul is in a state where it is waiting to shatter into dust and scatter away. Unless Valdenava's authority is cancelled, his information particles will be erased, and the existence known as Benimaru will return to nothingness. To be adored by a puppet without a soul. Or perhaps he didn't realize you were a fake. Valdenava was speaking in the distance, but I had no composure to listen to his words. Benimaru is more important. That god, or whatever he is, doesn't understand anything. Rimuru-sama is. Rimuru-sama. Benimaru, the Benimaru who was already on the verge of disappearing, passionately retorted for my sake. Even though I don't even believe in myself. Benimaru. Rimuru-sama is. Hope. If you don't think you've lost. If you don't think you've lost, then it isn't a defeat. Think of the next plan, or the plan after that, and just keep challenging until you win. Justice has no meaning unless you win. Because if you win in the end, that becomes justice. With Benimaru's words, I remembered that truth. You don't have to talk anymore. Benimaru, you focus on recovering. No. I am, already. It's okay. The children who are going to be born are waiting for your return. Don't get weak-spirited. This is an order. Don't die. If everyone is going to make unreasonable demands of me, then I won't lose to them at it either. I gave an order in a ruthless tone, one that Benimaru, who seemed to have accepted death, could absolutely not defend against. Benimaru smiled faintly. Responding to that smile, I began my interference, my treatment of Benimaru's crumbling soul. Calling it treatment makes it sound formal, but it was actually a simple procedure. I had given up on fully mastering my authorities since Seal-san wasn't here, but in an emergency like this, the situation was different. This wasn't the time to whine about what I couldn't do. I had to do my absolute best. I have witnessed the miracles Seal-san performed countless times. I knew the steps, so all I had to do was imitate them without overthinking it. I didn't know if it was the right answer, but if I did nothing, Benimaru would die. In that case, I had no choice but to try. I had exposed my defenseless back to Valdenava, but since I didn't intend to die from just 1 or 2 attacks, it wasn't a problem. I focused on Benimaru, prioritizing the completion of his treatment. The key was to ensure the information particles weren't lost. That is where my slime cells come into play. Since each cell can perform a memory backup, they are excellent tools capable of restoring the whole entity, as long as a part remains. For now, if I just shove these in, the rest should work out somehow. Of course, that wasn't all. I also used my soul gluttony to completely devour Valdenava's strange authority. There. This was a technique I could handle using my slime instincts, so the process finished without any issues. Now, all that was left was to wait for Benimaru to wake up, but here, I added a pinch of my own ingenuity. To replenish his lost energy, I tried infusing him with turn null energy from my imaginary space. I had seen Diablo do it, so I tried copying him. It went reasonably well, and I could feel the slime cells I had transplanted into Benimaru activating. However, that was as far as I could go. A subjective span of time both short and long passed by. The treatment should have been finished, yet Benimaru didn't wake up. Anxiety began to rise within me. At this point, I had no choice but to keep going until he woke up. Time was currently stopped, and while Benimaru had gained the ability to move within the suspended world, losing consciousness meant he was now trapped by it. That's it, I realized. Because my slime cells were active, his body was regenerating even without his consciousness. Since Benimaru was left behind by the suspended world the moment he fainted, he would likely wake up once time began to flow again. It was just a guess, but I had to trust in Benimaru. Normal recovery magic cannot be used within the suspended world. Therefore, I didn't possess any means to wake him up at this stage. Just as I understood that, I heard Valdenava's exasperated voice. Such futile resistance. As he said this, he seemed to recall the sword to his hand. I had hoped to finish before Valdenava's follow-up attack, but it seemed I wasn't fast enough. I had no choice. I would have to take the hit. I steeled myself for it. And then, at the exact moment Valdenava's sword was about to be unleashed again. Wait just a minute. With that shout, Ramiris appeared, cutting in between Valdenava and me. Ramiris. Why is she here? Or rather, how does she even get here? It seemed I wasn't the only one surprised by this. If it isn't Ramiris, what the hell did you come here for? So you can move even when time is stopped. That is surprising, but surely you realize you are of no use in this battle. I mean, seriously. Now. Guy and Milim were speaking to Ramiris. Even Dino, who had merely been spectating, asked Ramiris half seriously. There were harsh words to direct at an old friend, but it was a valid point that anyone would have made. The answer lay with the figure standing behind Ramiris. It was Zegion. Rimuru-sama, I have arrived, Zegion said, kneeling behind me. I had safely finished treating Benimaru and stood up. Ramiris's arrival was a stroke of unexpected luck. Thanks to her, I was safe as well. I looked at Zegion. Once again, he had become so strong he seemed like a different person. To be able to use spatial teleportation to get here even while time was stopped, it seemed he had acquired some truly absurd power. I was glad he was on our side, but he still lacked the power to face Veldanava. Direct interference with the soul was likely something even Zegion couldn't handle. Protect Benimaru here. I will defeat him. I entrusted Benimaru to Zegion. As for Benimaru's treatment, there was nothing more I could do. So, the right move was to focus on Veldanava. Rimuru. Ramiris called out to me at this precise moment. I want you to leave this to me. Leave it to you. Is there something you can do? Of course there is. I can use magic anytime, you know. I think I can save Benimaru-chan, too. Seriously. I had underestimated Ramiris. If that was true, it was incredible. Haha, yep. Only, I'm a little short on power, so I kinda need you to lend me yours. No, this suddenly sounded suspicious. But still, she was moving within this suspended world, and the full extent of Ramiris's power remained a mystery. Even Seal-san hadn't been able to reproduce Ramiris's intrinsic skill, small world. If lending her power meant she could treat Benimaru, I'd lend her as much as she needed. What do I need to do? Well, can you connect the two of us with a soul corridor, just like you did with Benimaru-chan? I wasn't confident without Seal-san, but using the same method I just used, there. Wait a sec. You don't have a soul. It's just your imagination. Ramiris was shouting something, but I brushed it off and finished the process. In that instant, Ramiris visibly grew. You're in your adult form. It's just your imagination. It definitely wasn't just my imagination, but if I said that, it would come right back to bite me. Leaving this to Ramiris, I told myself to do what I needed to do, and promptly switched my mindset. It looks like my turn is over when it comes to dealing with Veldanava, he thought. It seemed Luminous felt the same way. There appears to be nothing left for me to do here. They seem to be struggling over there, so I shall go and lend them a hand, she said, before taking her leave. He thought that was for the best. Luminous's authority could not activate while time was stopped. Having witnessed Rimuru heal Benimaru, she likely concluded that there was nothing more she could do here. Or rather, she decided that if her power was to be of any use, it would be better served by joining Ultima and the others in their battle. Furthermore, there was no longer a need to heal the human elites. Part of this was because Misery and Rain had stepped in, but mainly it was because very few people could even move within this suspended world. Rather than trying to protect those whose defense had dropped to zero, it was better to lure the enemy away, outside the area of influence. Since the holy field had already lost its meaning, it was preferable to fight in a location void of people. The fact that she could make such a judgment in an instant suggested that Luminous had not yet abandoned hope. As expected of Luminous. She's as reliable as ever, he thought, feeling grateful to her. Even for Guy, there was little he could do against Veldanava. Therefore, he remained more vigilant of Ivorage than of Veldanava. On that front, Ivorage had been stabbed by an unfamiliar sword and was undergoing a mysterious transformation. The situation did not permit any complacency. Guy wanted to stop it, but he sensed that interfering halfway would only lead to a more ominous outcome. The correct move is to observe the progression and deal with it appropriately, he concluded, maintaining a watchful stance without letting his guard down. Even so. He thought, processing this alongside the other events. The attack Veldanava had demonstrated was a direct interference with the soul. Just seeing that was enough to realize, without a doubt, that this Veldanava was the real deal. Direct interference with the soul of a living being was something even the primordials, the kings of demons, could not achieve. If such a thing were possible, combat itself would become meaningless. To interfere with the soul, one must first bypass the spiritual body and the astral body. Otherwise, no attack, regardless of its nature, could have any effect. It was an absurdly dangerous technique. Even Guy would have been helpless against it upon a first encounter. The soul is the very foundation of the self. To have it interfered with is equivalent to having one's life and death held in the palm of the opponent's hand. Guy's assessment was that a fight simply couldn't take place under those conditions. Could I counter it if I utilized my authority to its fullest? He pondered, but there was no way to know without trying. After all, even if he protected his own soul, he didn't know how far the influence of that direct interference would extend. Moreover, that attack would interfere even if one tried to escape using a parallel existence like Valgrant. The only option was to resist directly, and failing to do so meant instant defeat, a gamble with incredibly poor odds. It was a battle that even Guy felt reluctant to initiate. However, Rimuru remained entirely composed. No matter how one looked at it, this was abnormal. Guy's eyes could see the pseudo-soul shining within Rimuru's body. What had once been a vessel of magisteel had now bathed in Rimuru's magic heals and evolved into the ultimate metal, Hihiur King. It appeared to be performing sufficiently as a vessel to house information particles. However, its structure was designed to reflect the ego by synchronizing with the soul, residing in the main body. Yet, Rimuru was harboring an ego despite having lost his soul. How is he doing that? Or rather, how is he even moving? Even Guy couldn't understand the logic behind it. Valdanava had called him an automaton, and that was to be expected. After all, the only logical explanation was that a program had been installed beforehand to mimic his behavior, moving him for the sole purpose of deceiving the opponent. In other words, Valdanava perceived that Rimuru had set a trap, a gimmick to deceive him even after being defeated. He believed Rimuru was already gone, and that a golem following his orders was merely imitating its master. That line of thinking made sense, but in Guy's eyes, the being standing before him looked like nothing other than Rimuru himself. Because it was impossible to program something that could reproduce Rimuru himself to such an extent. Besides, Rimuru, who had begun treating Benimaru, had done something truly outrageous. It was a divine technique, absolutely impossible for a mere program, a feat so incredible it left even Guy dumbfounded. I mean, seriously. I'm getting more pissed off than amazed here. That bastard just casually performed body modification without even using his authority. He was likely trying to replenish Benimaru's lost energy, but he had taken the clearly dangerous nihility, converted it into energy compatible with Benimaru, and transferred it. Benimaru still hadn't woken up, but that was hardly surprising. Excessive energy had been poured into his body. He wouldn't be able to move until he adapted to it. Hey, give me a break, was Guy's honest feeling. He wanted to scream at him to cut it out, but he was desperately holding it in. He could understand the theory, but it was such a dangerous act that he wouldn't ever want to attempt it himself. And then, on top of that, Ramiris showed up. As soon as she finished some sort of split-second negotiation, Ramiris grew up. Literally. She transformed from her small fairy form into her adult form as the Spirit Queen. At this point, it was just one what the hell is happening moment after another. Converting extremely dangerous energy into a power that anyone could handle. It made one want to shout, if you can do that, then anything goes. There was no way a mere programmed doll could perform such a series of dangerous and absurd acts. These grounds for concluding that Rimuru was the real deal couldn't be any clearer. That meant the one standing before him was Rimuru himself, and he was currently more serious than he had ever been before. He had only known him as someone aloof who avoided conflict, but the Rimuru before him now seemed to actively desire battle. Valdanava, the creator god and his former friend. Rimuru, the comrade Guy acknowledged and relied upon as a fellow member of the Octagram. Well now, his power would prove superior. From Guy's perspective, it was only natural to be consumed by curiosity.